The flight attendant's career ended in a single moment when she denied water to a 12-year-old black girl. What she didn't know was that the quiet man in seat 2A, calmly recording everything on his phone, wasn't just another passenger. He was Marcus Wellington, CEO and owner of Atlantic Airways, watching his daughter being humiliated at 30,000 feet above the ground. Before we dive into this shocking story that will leave you speechless, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a story that proves karma always finds its way. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell because stories like this remind us why we must stand up against injustice. Now, let's see how one moment of discrimination changed everything for everyone involved. 12-year-old Zara Wellington clutched her purple backpack as she walked down the jet bridge toward Atlantic Airways Flight 4447. Her father Marcus had surprised her with this trip to Los Angeles to visit her grandmother, and she couldn't contain her excitement. What Zara didn't know was that her father owned the very airline they were boarding, a fact Marcus kept hidden to give his daughter normal experiences away from their wealthy lifestyle. Marcus deliberately chose seats in the main cabin rather than first class. Seat 14B and 14C would be their home for the next 5 hours, surrounded by regular travelers rather than the elite passengers who usually recognized him. He wanted Zara to understand how ordinary people lived and traveled, believing these lessons would shape her character. Flight attendant Jennifer Hayes noticed them immediately as they found their seats. At 28 years old, Jennifer had worked for Atlantic Airways for 5 years, long enough to develop her own assumptions about passengers based on appearance and seat location. She observed the well-dressed black man and his daughter, noting their quality clothing and the girls' expensive sneakers. Something about their presence irritated her, though she couldn't quite articulate why. "Excuse me, are you sure you have the right seats?" Jennifer asked with a forced smile, checking her passenger manifest. Sometimes people get confused about their seat assignments. Marcus showed her their boarding passes with quiet patience. "We're in the correct seats, thank you." Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. She had expected them to be in the back of the plane, not in these premium economy seats that cost nearly $400 each. Her prejudices began to surface as she wondered how they could afford such expensive tickets. The plane filled quickly with a diverse mix of passengers. The Morrison family, a wealthy white couple with their twin boys, settled into first class with their designer luggage and entitled attitudes. David Chen, a young tech professional, took his aisle seat, 3 rows up, already engrossed in his laptop. The elderly Johnson couple, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary with their first trip to California, helped each other with their small carry-on bags. Marcus observed everything with the trained eye of someone who had built this airline from nothing. He noticed how Jennifer's demeanor changed depending on which passengers she addressed. Her voice became warm and welcoming when helping the Morrisons with their champagne preferences, but turned cold and professional when the elderly black couple asked about blanket availability. "Daddy, why does that lady seem angry?" Zara whispered, having picked up on Jennifer's hostile energy. "Some people carry their own problems, sweetheart," Marcus replied softly. "We can't control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond." As the plane prepared for takeoff, Captain Rodriguez's voice filled the cabin with standard safety announcements. The weather looked perfect for their cross-country journey, with clear skies and minimal turbulence expected. Jennifer went through her safety demonstration with mechanical precision, her smile genuine only when directed toward the white passengers in premium seats. Marcus pulled out his phone, ostensibly to check emails, but actually began documenting the subtle discrimination he was already witnessing. As CEO, he received regular reports about customer service metrics, but experiencing it firsthand as just another passenger revealed troubling patterns he hadn't seen in corporate reports. "This is going to be such a fun trip," Zara said, bouncing slightly in her seat as the engines revved for takeoff. "Grandma is going to be so surprised when we show up at her door." Marcus smiled at his daughter's innocence, unaware that their fun trip was about to become a lesson in injustice that would change both their lives forever. As the plane lifted off from Atlanta, climbing toward cruising altitude, neither father nor daughter could have imagined the confrontation that awaited them at 30,000 feet. Jennifer Hayes walked the aisles with practiced efficiency, but her prejudices followed her every step. She had no idea that the quiet man in 14B held the power to end her career with a single phone call, or that her next few hours of service would become a watershed moment for the entire airline industry. 2 hours into the flight, the subtle patterns of discrimination became impossible to ignore. Jennifer moved through the cabin with her service cart, dispensing refreshments with a smile that seemed to have different wattages depending on the recipient's skin color. When she reached the Morrison family in first class, her voice became honey-sweet. "Would you like some warm nuts? We have macadamias and pecans from Georgia. And can I offer you some more champagne? It's a lovely vintage." Mrs. Morrison giggled appreciatively. "You're so attentive. This is exactly the kind of service we expect from Atlantic Airways." Jennifer beamed with pride. "We aim to exceed expectations for our valued passengers." But when she approached the elderly Johnson couple celebrating their anniversary, her tone shifted dramatically. "Beverages?" she asked curtly, not bothering to list the available options or offer any of the premium snacks she had lavished on the white passengers moments before. "Could we perhaps have some of those warm nuts you mentioned to the other passengers?" "Mrs. Johnson asked politely. Today is our 50th wedding anniversary, and it would make the celebration extra special." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "Those are reserved for first-class passengers only. I can offer you standard peanuts or pretzels." Mr. Johnson looked confused. "But we saw you serving them to passengers in our section just a few minutes ago." "I think you must be mistaken," Jennifer replied coolly, moving her cart forward without offering congratulations on their milestone anniversary. Zara had been watching the interactions with growing concern. At 12 years old, she possessed the sharp observational skills that children often have before adults teach them to ignore uncomfortable truths. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on Marcus's sleeve. "Why does the flight attendant give different snacks to different people? Isn't that unfair?" Marcus looked up from his phone, where he had been discreetly recording Jennifer's differential treatment of passengers. This was exactly the kind of teaching moment he had hoped to avoid during their trip. But life rarely accommodates our preferences for timing. Sometimes people make unfair choices based on how others look or where they sit, he explained quietly. It's wrong, but it happens. The important thing is recognizing it and doing something about it. But why would she do that? It doesn't make sense. Prejudice rarely makes sense, sweetheart. That's what makes it so dangerous. Jennifer had overheard their conversation and rolled her eyes dramatically. Some people always find something to complain about, she muttered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Always playing the race card when they don't get special treatment. Her comment sent ripples of discomfort through the cabin. David Chen looked up from his laptop, disturbed by the blatant unprofessionalism. The Morrisons nodded approvingly, while the Johnsons exchanged worried glances. Another flight attendant, Maria Rodriguez, had been watching Jennifer's behavior with growing concern. Maria had worked in aviation for 15 years and recognized discrimination when she saw it. But challenging a colleague in front of passengers violated company protocol, leaving her in an impossible position. "Jennifer," Maria said quietly as they passed in the galley, "maybe we should discuss passenger service standards." "Don't lecture me about standards," Jennifer snapped. "I know how to handle demanding passengers. Some people need to learn their place and stop expecting special treatment they haven't earned." Her words carried enough volume to reach several nearby seats, including Marcus's. He continued recording, his expression remaining calm despite the rage building inside him. As the owner of Atlantic Airways, he had built the company on principles of equality and respect. Watching his own employee violate those values while his daughter witnessed it was almost unbearable. Zara tried to make friendly conversation when Jennifer passed their row again. "I love your uniform. The blue color is so pretty. Is it fun being a flight attendant?" Jennifer barely glanced at her. It would be more fun if passengers followed rules and didn't ask for special treatment every 5 minutes. The coldness in her response was shocking. Other passengers began to notice the hostile treatment directed toward the well-mannered child and her patient father. An uncomfortable tension filled the cabin as the discrimination became increasingly obvious to everyone aboard. Marcus put his arm around Zara, who was beginning to understand that the flight attendant's rudeness was specifically directed at them. "Remember what we talked about," he whispered. "Some people reveal their true character when they think there are no consequences for their actions." He had no idea how prophetic his words would prove to be. The tension that had been simmering throughout the flight reached a boiling point when Zara's simple request for water triggered Jennifer's most shocking display of discrimination yet. Zara had been reading her book for the past hour, occasionally, looking out the window at the clouds below. The dry airplane air was making her throat scratchy, and she was developing a mild headache from dehydration. She waited patiently for Jennifer to finish serving drinks to the passengers ahead of them before politely raising her hand. "Excuse me, miss. Could I please have some water? I'm getting really thirsty." Jennifer looked at her with barely concealed annoyance. "Water service isn't scheduled for another hour. You'll have to wait." Zara nodded politely, though she was genuinely uncomfortable. She had been taught to respect adults and follow rules, so she returned to her book and tried to ignore her growing thirst. 10 minutes later, a white child 3 rows ahead made the same request. "Can I have some apple juice, please?" Jennifer's demeanor transformed instantly. "Of course, sweetie. Let me get you a nice cold juice box. Would you like cookies to go with it?" She practically skipped to the galley to fetch the refreshments, returning with a bright smile and extra snacks. Zara watched in confusion as the other child received immediate service for a less urgent request. Her headache was getting worse, and her throat felt increasingly dry. After waiting another 20 minutes, Zara politely tried again. "Miss Hayes, I'm really sorry to bother you, but I'm very thirsty and my head is starting to hurt. Could I please just have a small cup of water?" Jennifer whipped around, her face flushed with anger. "I already told you that water service isn't scheduled yet. Some people need to learn patience and respect for airline procedures. This isn't your personal restaurant where you can make demands whenever you want." Her voice carried throughout the cabin, drawing stares from other passengers. The harshness of her tone toward a polite child was shocking to witness. Marcus had been maintaining his composure, but seeing his daughter's distress pushed him to his limit. He stood up calmly and addressed Jennifer with quiet authority. "My daughter has asked politely for water twice now. She's thirsty and developing a headache. This is a basic human need, not an unreasonable demand." Jennifer's eyes flashed with defiance. "And I've explained the airline policy twice now. Maybe you should have thought about bringing your own water if you can't wait for scheduled service, like everyone else." The insult was clear to everyone listening. Several passengers looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to support Jennifer's stance. The cabin was dividing along racial lines, with the discrimination becoming a public spectacle. "I notice you brought juice to another child just minutes ago," Marcus observed, his voice remaining steady despite his internal fury. "That was different," Jennifer snapped. "That child asked nicely and didn't keep pestering me with repeated demands." The lie was obvious to everyone who had witnessed both interactions. Zara had been far more polite than the other child, yet she was being punished while he was rewarded. Now, before we continue with this shocking story, I want to hear from you. Comment number 1 if you think Marcus should have revealed who he was immediately to stop this discrimination. Comment number 2 if you believe he was right to let Jennifer reveal her true character first. Hit that like button if you're as outraged as I am by this treatment of an innocent child. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. What do you think Jennifer would do if she knew she was discriminating against the daughter of the man who owns the entire airline? Let's see how much deeper this rabbit hole goes. Jennifer's voice rose as she became more aggressive. "Furthermore, I suggest that if you can't follow simple airline policies, maybe you should consider flying with a different airline next time. One that might be more suited to passengers with your particular needs and expectations." The coded language was thinly veiled racism, and everyone in the cabin understood exactly what she meant. Marcus continued recording everything, his phone capturing both video and audio of the discrimination his daughter was experiencing. Maria Rodriguez finally couldn't stand by any longer. She approached the situation, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Jennifer, why don't I handle this section? I can get the young lady some water." "No," Jennifer barked. "This is my section, and I'll handle it according to airline policy. Some passengers need to learn that making demands doesn't get them special treatment." Zara began to cry softly, overwhelmed by the hostility directed at her for simply asking for water. The sight of the well-mannered child in tears while being publicly humiliated struck other passengers as deeply wrong. David Chen pulled out his phone and began recording. "This is unacceptable treatment of a child," he said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. The Morrison family, however, seemed to approve of Jennifer's stance. "Finally, someone who enforces policies fairly," Mrs. Morrison whispered to her husband. "Too many people think they deserve special treatment these days." Marcus comforted his crying daughter while maintaining his dignified composure. Inside, he was planning exactly how this incident would transform his airline's training programs and accountability measures. Jennifer Hayes had no idea that her career was ending in real time, broadcast live to the other passengers who were documenting her behavior. The water that Zara had requested so politely would become the catalyst for industry-wide changes that would affect every airline in America. What happened next shocked everyone in the cabin and would be talked about for years to come. Jennifer Hayes had crossed a line from which there was no return, and she was about to make it infinitely worse. Instead of de-escalating the situation, Jennifer decided to make an example of Zara and Marcus. She moved to the center of the aisle where her voice would carry throughout the entire cabin and began what could only be described as a public humiliation campaign. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced loudly, as if making an official airline announcement, "I want to address a situation that affects all passengers on this flight. Some travelers seem to believe that airline policies don't apply to them, and that making repeated demands will get them special treatment." Every conversation in the cabin stopped. Passengers turned to look at Jennifer, then at Marcus and Zara, understanding immediately who was being targeted. "We have policies for a reason," Jennifer continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "When passengers refuse to follow these policies and continue making demands, it disrupts service for everyone else. I want to remind all passengers that this airline has standards, and we expect everyone to respect those standards regardless of their personal expectations." The announcement was devastating in its cruelty. Zara buried her face in her father's shoulder, sobbing quietly. She was 12 years old, and she was being publicly shamed in front of 100 strangers for asking for water. Marcus felt his jaw clench with controlled rage. In his 20 years of building Atlantic Airways, he had never witnessed such unprofessional conduct from any employee. The fact that his own daughter was the victim made the situation almost unbearable. But Jennifer wasn't finished. She walked closer to their row, speaking just loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear clearly. "Some people seem to think that if they can't get what they want through proper channels, they can just keep asking until they wear down the crew. Well, I've been doing this job for 5 years, and I've learned to recognize passengers who think they're entitled to special treatment just because they complain the loudest." The words "special treatment" were emphasized in a way that left no doubt about their racial implications. Jennifer was essentially announcing to the entire cabin that this black family was trying to get unearned privileges through manipulation. David Chen stood up from his seat. "This is completely inappropriate. That child asked politely for water. There's no justification for this kind of public humiliation." "Sir, please remain seated," Jennifer snapped. "This doesn't concern you, and I won't have passengers disrupting my cabin management." "Disrupting your cabin management?" David shot back. "You're the one making announcements to shame a 12-year-old girl." The cabin erupted in murmurs as passengers began taking sides. The Morrisons clearly supported Jennifer's actions, nodding approvingly at her firm hand with difficult passengers. But the Johnsons looked horrified, recognizing the discrimination they had faced throughout their own lives. A middle-aged white woman in the row behind Marcus leaned forward. "That poor child has been nothing but polite. This is disgraceful." Jennifer's face flushed red with anger at the criticism. She had expected universal support for her enforcement of airline policies, not a divided cabin questioning her authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your comments to yourself." I'm handling a situation with passengers who refuse to follow airline procedures." "What procedures?" the woman demanded. "The procedure that says children can't have water when they're thirsty?" Jennifer's response revealed the depth of her prejudice. "The procedure that says passengers need to understand their place and stop, acting like they're entitled to services they haven't paid for. Some people need to learn that flying isn't a right, it's a privilege, and privileges come with responsibilities." The implication was clear. Marcus and Zara didn't belong on this flight and should be grateful for whatever service they received. Marcus whispered to his daughter, "Zara, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be treated unfairly, because it will help you understand when others are hurting. But also remember that this woman's behavior says nothing about your worth and everything about her character." Jennifer overheard and laughed mockingly. "Oh, please, spare us the victim speech. Nobody is buying the discrimination story. This is about a passenger who can't follow simple rules and wants special treatment because his daughter cried." The cruelty of dismissing a child's tears was shocking even to passengers who had initially supported Jennifer. Several people began pulling out their phones to record the incident, sensing that they were witnessing something that would have serious consequences. "Stop recording," Jennifer demanded, her voice becoming shrill. "Passengers do not have the right to film crew members without permission. This violates airline policy and federal regulations." But the phones stayed out. Passengers understood they were documenting something important, something that needed to be preserved as evidence of what they had witnessed. Marcus continued comforting Zara while internally cataloging every word for the investigation that would inevitably follow. Jennifer Hayes had just humiliated his daughter in front of a plane full of strangers, and she had no idea that she was destroying her own career in the process. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences for Jennifer's actions. The question was how severe those consequences would be. The situation spiraled completely out of control when Jennifer made the fatal decision to escalate her confrontation with Marcus, pushing the incident past the point of no return. As more passengers began recording the discrimination, Jennifer's authority was being challenged from multiple directions. Instead of recognizing her mistakes and attempting to de-escalate, she doubled down on her aggressive stance with devastating consequences. "I said stop filming," she shouted, pointing at David Chen and several other passengers who had their phones out. "This is a violation of airline policy and federal aviation regulations. I'm going to have security meet this plane and have recording. Passengers removed for interfering with crew operations." Marcus looked up calmly from comforting his daughter. "Actually, passengers have the right to record interactions with flight crew when documenting potential discrimination. There are no federal regulations prohibiting this." Jennifer's eyes narrowed dangerously. "And who are you exactly? Some kind of aviation lawyer? I suppose you're going to lecture me about airline policies now?" The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was challenging Marcus not just as a passenger, but as a black man who dared to correct her understanding of airline regulations. "I'm simply a father who wants his daughter to be treated with basic human dignity," Marcus replied quietly. "Basic human dignity?" Jennifer laughed harshly. "Basic human dignity means following rules and not making demands when you don't get your way. Basic human dignity means understanding that when you buy a coach ticket, you get coach service, not first-class treatment just because you complain loud enough." The accusation stung because it was so completely wrong. Marcus and Zara weren't demanding first-class service, they were asking for water. But Jennifer's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that her treatment of them was wrong, so she constructed an alternate reality where they were the unreasonable ones. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, her voice rising to address the entire cabin again, "I want all passengers to understand that discrimination claims are often used by people who can't accept responsibility for their own behavior. Some passengers think they can get whatever they want by playing the victim card. But this airline has standards that apply to everyone equally." The statement was a masterclass in gaslighting. Jennifer was reframing her obvious discrimination as equal treatment, while portraying her victims as manipulative liars trying to get unearned benefits. Marcus felt something snap inside him. Not anger exactly, but a cold, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. His daughter had been humiliated, lied about, and publicly shamed by his own employee. The time for passive documentation was over. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made several passengers turn to look at him. "In my experience, people who accuse others of playing victim cards are usually trying to deflect attention from their own unacceptable behavior." Jennifer's face twisted with rage. "Your experience? And what experience would that be? Let me guess you're going to tell me you're some kind of important person who deserves special treatment. Maybe you think you're too good to follow the same rules as everyone else?" The mockery in her voice was vicious. She was attacking not just Marcus personally, but the very idea that a black man could have relevant experience or authority worth respecting. "I have a lot of experience with customer service standards," Marcus said carefully, "and what I'm witnessing here falls far below any acceptable standard." "Customer service standards," Jennifer practically shrieked. "You want to talk about customer service?" Customer service means passengers showing respect for crew members and following airline policies without making demands every 5 minutes. Customer service doesn't mean giving special treatment to every passenger who cries discrimination when they don't get their way. Her voice carried throughout the cabin, making her position clear to everyone aboard. In Jennifer's mind, any complaint about discrimination was automatically illegitimate, and any black passenger who didn't accept poor treatment was being unreasonable. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, clearly having been alerted to the disturbance in the cabin. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some turbulence in the cabin, and I'm asking all passengers to remain calm and seated while our crew addresses the situation." Jennifer took the captain's announcement as validation of her authority. "You heard the captain. Everyone needs to remain seated and allow me to handle this situation according to proper procedures." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "I'm calling the air marshal to report disruptive passengers who are threatening flight safety by refusing to follow crew instructions and recording crew members without permission." The threat was clear. She was going to have Marcus arrested when they landed. Marcus watched her make the call with perfect composure, knowing that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her professional life. Air Marshal Williams would indeed get involved, but not in the way Jennifer expected. As Jennifer spoke to Air Marshal Dispatch, describing Marcus as an aggressive passenger making threats and disrupting the flight, Marcus made his own quiet decision. The time for anonymity was over. His daughter had suffered enough, and Jennifer Hayes was about to learn exactly who she had been discriminating against for the past 3 hours. The revelation would change everything. The moment Air Marshal Williams approached their row, everything changed. What Jennifer expected to be her triumph became the beginning of her professional destruction. Officer Williams, a seasoned law enforcement professional with 15 years of aviation security experience, immediately recognized that something was off about Jennifer's report. The aggressive, threatening passenger she had described was sitting calmly with his arm around a crying 12-year-old girl, showing no signs of the disruptive behavior she had claimed. "Sir, I understand there's been some kind of disturbance," Williams asked professionally, his eyes taking in the scene quickly. Marcus looked up with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Officer, my daughter asked for water and has been refused for over an hour. When I politely requested that she be given water, the flight attendant began publicly humiliating us both." Williams looked at Jennifer, whose face was flushed with righteous indignation. "This passenger has been making demands and disrupting my service for hours. He's been recording crew members without permission and encouraging other passengers to interfere with my cabin management." The air marshal's trained eye swept the cabin, noting the obvious tension and the fact that multiple passengers were still recording with their phones. In his experience, when passengers felt compelled to document crew behavior, there was usually a good reason. "What specifically did he do that was threatening or disruptive?" Williams asked Jennifer. He kept asking for water after I explained airline policy, and he questioned my authority when I was trying to maintain order in the cabin," Williams frowned. "Those weren't disruptive behaviors. They were normal passenger requests." He turned to nearby passengers for clarification. David Chen immediately spoke up. "Officer, I've been watching this entire situation. The child politely asked for water and was refused. When her father intervened, the flight attendant began publicly humiliating them both. I started recording because what I witnessed was clear discrimination. The elderly Mrs. Johnson nodded vigorously. That poor baby has been nothing but polite. The way she's been treated is shameful. Shameful. Williams began to understand the real situation. Miss Hayes, did you refuse to give water to this child? Water service wasn't scheduled yet. I was following airline procedures. But you gave juice to another child during the same time period? Williams had been listening to passenger accounts and piecing together the timeline. Jennifer's face went white. That was different. That child asked nicely. And this child didn't ask nicely? Several passengers called out simultaneously. She was very polite. The sweetest little girl. She said please and everything. Williams turned back to Marcus, who had remained silent during the exchange. There was something about the man's bearing that suggested he was used to command, used to being listened to and respected. His calm in the face of obvious injustice spoke to a deep well of self-control. Sir, would you mind telling me your name? Marcus glanced at his daughter, who was still sniffling from the humiliation she had endured. He had hoped to complete the flight without revealing his identity, but Jennifer's escalation had made that impossible. He stood up slowly, his presence suddenly commanding the entire cabin's attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being the final word in any room. Officer Williams, my name is Marcus Wellington. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and owner of Atlantic Airways. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's mouth fell open as the words sank in. The color drained from her face as she realized what she had just done. The quiet man she had been discriminating against, the father whose child she had publicly humiliated, owned the entire airline. What do you think went through Jennifer's mind in that moment? Comment number 1, if you think she immediately realized her career was over. Comment number 2, if you think she was too shocked to understand what had just happened. Smash that like button if you're ready to see justice served, and make sure you subscribe because this story is about to reach its explosive conclusion. How do you think Marcus will handle an employee who humiliated his daughter in front of 100 passengers? Let's find out what happens when discrimination meets consequences. Other passengers began whispering frantically as the revelation sank in. The Johnsons looked vindicated. David Chen smiled with satisfaction, and even some passengers who had initially supported Jennifer began to look uncomfortable. Marcus pulled out his company identification badge, the official credential that granted him access to every aspect of Atlantic Airways operations. Williams examined it carefully and nodded respectfully. Mr. Wellington, I apologize for the disturbance. Officer, you have nothing to apologize for. You responded professionally to a report. The issue here is that one of my employees has spent the last 3 hours discriminating against passengers, including my daughter, and then filed a false report claiming we were the disruptive ones. Jennifer finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. Mr. Wellington, I didn't know. Marcus turned to look at her directly for the first time since revealing his identity. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. Miss Hayes, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you treated a 12-year-old child and her father with discrimination and cruelty. Your behavior would have been equally wrong if I were any other passenger on this flight. The truth of his words resonated throughout the cabin. Jennifer's discrimination wasn't worse because her victims were important. It was wrong because discrimination is always wrong. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Los Angeles. Please ensure your seats are in the upright position and prepare for landing. But nobody was thinking about landing procedures. They were all focused on the drama unfolding in the center aisle, where a CEO was confronting the employee who had humiliated his child. Marcus sat back down and pulled Zara close. Sweetheart, sometimes bad people reveal themselves clearly, and when they do, we have the responsibility to make sure they can't hurt other children the way they hurt you. Jennifer stood frozen in the aisle, finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. Her 5-year career with Atlantic Airways was over, and she had no one to blame but herself. The plane continued its descent toward Los Angeles, but for Jennifer Hayes, the landing would mark the end of everything she had worked for in aviation. The moment Atlantic Airways Flight 447 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, Marcus Wellington shifted from passenger to CEO, and the full weight of corporate accountability came crashing down on Jennifer Hayes. As passengers began deplaning, Marcus remained seated, his phone already buzzing with calls from his executive team. Word had somehow reached the ground before the plane did. Social media posts from passengers had begun circulating, and the airline's crisis management team was already mobilizing. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Zara asked, noticing her father's sudden transition from vacation mode to business mode. "No, sweetheart, but some people are going to face consequences for their actions today. That's how justice works." Marcus stood and addressed the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize to each of you for what you witnessed today. The behavior you saw from Miss Hayes does not represent the values of Atlantic Airways, and I assure you that appropriate action will be taken immediately." Jennifer had been standing near the galley, seemingly paralyzed by the unfolding catastrophe. As passengers filed past her, several made pointed comments about her behavior. The elderly Mrs. Johnson stopped directly in front of her. "Young lady, I've lived through real discrimination, and what you did to that baby was inexcusable. You should be ashamed of yourself." Mr. Johnson added quietly, "In my day, people like you wore white hoods. At least they were honest about their hatred." The words struck Jennifer like physical blows. David Chen paused as he passed, holding up his phone. "Everything you said and did is recorded. The whole world is going to see exactly who you are." Even some of the passengers who had initially supported Jennifer's stance began to distance themselves. Mrs. Morrison whispered to her husband, "I didn't realize he was the owner. We should probably keep quiet about this." Marcus waited until most passengers had deplaned before approaching Jennifer directly. She stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. "Miss Hayes, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. You'll be escorted off this aircraft and will not be allowed to work any more flights until this matter is resolved." "Mr. Wellington, please," Jennifer sobbed. "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Marcus's expression remained stern, but not cruel. "Miss Hayes, this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern of discriminatory behavior that culminated in the public humiliation of a 12-year-old child. The only mistake was that you revealed your true character in front of witnesses." Security personnel boarded the aircraft, having been called by the airline's operations center. They escorted Jennifer off the plane while passengers in the terminal watched, many recognizing her from the viral videos that were already spreading across social media platforms. Within 2 hours of landing, Marcus had convened an emergency meeting with his executive team via video conference from the airport VIP lounge. Atlantic Airways Chief Human Resources Officer, Legal Counsel, and Head of Customer Experience joined the call while Marcus recounted the incident in detail. "Sir, we need to get ahead of this story," said Sarah Chen, the airline's Director of Communications. "The videos are already trending on Twitter and TikTok. We're getting calls from news outlets wanting statements." "Good," Marcus replied firmly. "This is exactly the kind of incident that should be public. We're not going to hide from this or try to minimize it. We're going to use it as an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to equality and accountability." The legal team advised that Jennifer's termination was inevitable given the documented evidence of discrimination and the false report to the air marshal. But Marcus wanted to go further. "I want a complete review of our hiring practices, training programs, and accountability measures. This incident reveals systemic failures that allowed someone like Jennifer Hayes to work for us for 5 years without her discriminatory attitudes being identified and addressed." By evening, Marcus had personally called every passenger who had witnessed the incident. The Johnsons received an upgrade to first class for their return flight and a formal apology letter. David Chen was offered lifetime elite status with Atlantic Airways for his supportive testimony and his courage in recording the discrimination. "Mr. Chen, passengers like you make the difference between injustice being hidden and justice being served. Your willingness to document what happened protected my daughter and potentially countless other passengers who might have faced similar treatment." Marcus also reached out to the white passengers who had supported Jennifer's behavior, including the Morrison family. His conversation with them was educational, rather than punitive. "Mrs. Morrison, I want you to understand that what you witnessed wasn't about airline policies or passenger entitlement. It was about an employee treating people differently based on their race. When we normalize that kind of discrimination, we become complicit in it." By the next morning, the story had exploded across national media. Major news networks picked up the story, using the passenger recordings and interviews to highlight ongoing discrimination in the airline industry. Jennifer Hayes became the face of workplace racism, her image broadcast across television screens nationwide. Marcus held a press conference at Atlantic Airways headquarters in Atlanta, using the incident as a platform to address systemic discrimination throughout the aviation industry. "What happened to my daughter happens to countless passengers every day," he said, standing behind a podium with Zara beside him. "The only difference is that most discrimination occurs without consequences, because the victims don't have the power to demand accountability. Today, we're changing that." He announced the creation of a $20 million fund dedicated to eliminating discrimination in aviation, with programs for training, accountability, and support for passengers who experience discriminatory treatment. Meanwhile, Jennifer's attempts to defend herself through media interviews only made her situation worse. In a disastrous appearance on a morning talk show, she claimed that she had been following company policy and that the incident was being blown out of proportion. "I treated all passengers equally," she insisted, despite the recorded evidence, proving otherwise. "Some people just can't accept that policies apply to everyone." Her continued denial of obvious discrimination, even with video evidence, became a case study in how not to handle a discrimination scandal. Employment lawyers used her interviews as examples of responses that guarantee termination and potential legal liability. The airline industry watched closely as Atlantic Airways implemented revolutionary changes in response to the incident. Other airlines began examining their own training programs and accountability measures, realizing that they could face similar scandals if they didn't address discriminatory practices proactively. Marcus transformed his daughter's painful experience into a catalyst for industry-wide reform, demonstrating how personal injustice could become the foundation for systemic change. The water that Zara had been denied became a watershed moment for aviation equality. But the story wasn't over yet. The most profound changes were still to come. 6 months after the incident, the repercussions had spread far beyond a single flight attendant's termination. What began as one child's request for water had become a defining moment for the entire aviation industry, with changes that would affect millions of passengers for generations to come. The Jennifer Hayes incident, as it became known in business schools and civil rights organizations, triggered the most comprehensive review of airline discrimination practices in aviation history. Marcus Wellington's response had set a new standard for corporate accountability that other industries began studying and implementing. Atlantic Airways became the first airline to implement mandatory bias training for all employees, not just flight attendants but ground crew, gate agents, and management personnel. The training program, developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations, included real-world scenarios based on documented discrimination cases. Every employee must understand that our commitment to equality isn't just about legal compliance, Marcus explained during a company-wide video conference. It's about recognizing the humanity and dignity of every person who chooses to fly with us. The Zara Wellington Foundation for Aviation Equality, funded by Marcus's personal contribution of $50 million, became a powerful force for change throughout the travel industry. The foundation provided legal support for passengers experiencing discrimination and conducted independent audits of airline service practices. Jennifer Hayes' termination became a landmark case study taught in business schools across the country. Her recorded statements during the incident were used to demonstrate how unconscious bias could escalate into overt discrimination when left unchecked. Employment lawyers regularly referenced her case when advising clients about discrimination. Prevention. Her attempts to find new employment in aviation were unsuccessful. The viral videos of her behavior had made her unhireable in the industry, and her continued public statements denying any wrongdoing only reinforced employers' reluctance to associate with her. Meanwhile, the passengers who had witnessed the incident became advocates for change in their own communities. David Chen used his technology platform to develop an app that allowed passengers to report discrimination incidents in real time, creating a database that airlines and regulators could use to identify problematic patterns. The elderly Johnsons became spokespeople for the foundation, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and emphasizing how Marcus's response had restored their faith in corporate responsibility. "We lived through the era when discrimination was legal," Mrs. Johnson said during a foundation event. "To see a CEO turn his daughter's pain into protection for other children gives us hope that the next generation will inherit a more just world." Other airlines scrambled to implement similar programs, not out of genuine commitment to equality, but from fear of facing their own Jennifer Hayes scandal. The competitive pressure created by Atlantic Airways' reputation for inclusive service forced industry-wide improvements in passenger treatment. Major airlines began advertising their diversity training programs and anti-discrimination policies, competing to demonstrate their commitment to equality. Customer surveys showed that passengers, particularly those from minority communities, increasingly chose airlines based on their reputation for fair treatment. The incident also triggered regulatory changes. The Federal Aviation Administration announced new requirements for discrimination reporting and response, with mandatory training programs for all aviation personnel. Airlines that failed to meet the new standards faced significant financial penalties and potential route restrictions. Marcus used his platform as a successful CEO to address discrimination beyond aviation. He spoke at corporate leadership conferences, university commencements, and civil rights events, always bringing Zara with him to emphasize that discrimination's victims are often children who have no power to protect themselves. "My daughter learned more about justice and social responsibility from this painful experience than she could have learned from years of privileged comfort," he often said. But no child should have to experience discrimination to learn about equality. Zara herself became a powerful advocate for other young people facing discrimination. At 13, she started speaking at schools about the importance of standing up for others and recognizing when treatment is unfair. "When someone is mean to you because of how you look, it's not about you," she would tell audiences of children her age. "It's about them, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it quietly. My dad taught me that we have a responsibility to protect other people from the same hurt." The foundation expanded beyond aviation, supporting research into discrimination across industries and funding legal challenges to discriminatory practices in housing, education, and employment. Academic researchers studied the Atlantic Airways transformation as an example of how corporate leadership could drive social change. Business journals published case studies analyzing how Marcus had converted a crisis into an opportunity for systemic reform. The incident's impact reached international aviation as well. Airlines in Europe, Asia, and other continents began examining their own practices and implementing training programs based on the Atlantic Airways model. Jennifer Hayes, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of discrimination. Her name was permanently associated with workplace racism, serving as a warning to others about how quickly careers could be destroyed by prejudicial behavior. The transformation was complete, but the most important changes were yet to be revealed. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Marcus and Zara Wellington walked down the jet bridge toward Atlantic Airways Flight 229, their journey coming full circle in the most meaningful way possible. This time, they were traveling in first-class seats that reflected their actual status. But more importantly, they were boarding an airline that had been fundamentally transformed by their experience. Every employee they encountered had been trained in anti-discrimination practices, and the company's culture had shifted toward genuine inclusivity rather than mere tolerance. Flight attendant Sarah Martinez greeted them warmly as they boarded. Sarah was part of the new generation of Atlantic Airways employees, hired after the comprehensive reforms and trained from day one in the company's commitment to equality. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Wellington." "Zara, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. Is there anything special I can do to make your flight comfortable?" The warmth was genuine, not the artificial politeness that masks prejudice. Zara, now 14 and confident in her own voice, smiled back. "Thank you, Miss Martinez. I'd love some water when it's convenient, please." Sarah laughed. "Of course. I'll bring that right away, still or sparkling." The simple exchange represented everything that had changed. A black child's request for water was met with immediate, respectful service, no different from how any other passenger would be treated. As they settled into their seats, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The discrimination Zara had faced was painful, but it had become the catalyst for changes that would protect countless other children from similar experiences. Other passengers boarding the flight included families of all backgrounds, served with equal courtesy and respect. The elderly couple taking their honeymoon 51 years late were helped with their luggage by crew members who genuinely cared about their comfort. A young black businessman was offered the same premium service as the white executive sitting nearby. During the flight, Zara worked on her laptop, preparing a presentation for the youth leadership conference she would address. The following week, at 14, she had become one of the youngest advocates for civil rights in the country, using her experience to inspire other young people to stand up against injustice. "Daddy," she said, looking up from her work, "do you think Jennifer Hayes ever understood what she did wrong?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Jennifer had disappeared from public view after her unsuccessful attempts to find new employment. Occasional reports suggested she had moved to a different state and taken a job outside the service industry. "I hope she did, sweetheart. Understanding is the first step toward becoming better. But even if she never learns, the important thing is that thousands of other people learned from what happened. Your experience taught them that discrimination has consequences and that children deserve to be treated with dignity." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad something good came from something that hurt so much. That's what resilience means," Marcus said. "It's not about avoiding pain, but about transforming pain into purpose." The flight proceeded smoothly, with exemplary service that had become the Atlantic Airways standard. When they landed in New York, passengers thanked the crew genuinely, appreciating the respectful treatment they had received throughout the journey. In the terminal, Marcus and Zara were approached by a young black mother traveling with her 6-year-old daughter. "Excuse me, aren't you the Wellingtons? The ones from the airline incident?" Marcus nodded, wondering what was coming next. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman continued, her eyes filling with tears. "Because of what you did, my daughter has never experienced discrimination when we fly. She doesn't even know it used to be different. She just expects to be treated with kindness and respect, and because of the changes you made, that's exactly what she gets." The little girl looked up at Zara with curiosity. "Are you famous?" Zara knelt down to the child's level. "Not really. But I helped make flying safer and fairer for kids like you. That's more important than being famous." As they walked through the terminal, Marcus realized that this was the true measure of their success. Not the media attention, not the corporate reforms, not even the industry-wide changes, but the fact that a 6-year-old girl could board an airplane expecting to be treated with dignity and actually receive it. The Zara Wellington Foundation had grown into a major force for equality, supporting anti-discrimination efforts across multiple industries. The foundation's work had helped pass new civil rights legislation and had funded legal challenges that expanded protections for minorities in the workplace. Marcus had been invited to speak at the White House about corporate responsibility and social justice. Major universities offered him honorary degrees for his leadership in transforming business culture. But the recognition he valued most came from parents who wrote to thank him for creating a world where their children faced less discrimination. Zara had received her own recognition, including a Youth Leadership Award from the NAACP and an invitation to speak at the United Nations about children's rights. But like her father, she was most proud of the individual lives that had been changed by their advocacy. As they waited for their car outside the terminal, Zara asked, "Do you think we'll ever need to do something like this again?" Marcus smiled at his daughter's assumption that fighting injustice was an ongoing responsibility, not a one-time event. "Probably, sweetheart. There will always be people who treat others unfairly, and there will always be a need for people who are willing to stand up and say that's not acceptable. The question isn't whether we'll face discrimination again, but whether we'll have the courage to fight it when we do." "Then I guess we'd better stay ready," Zara said with the confidence of someone who had already proven her strength. As their car pulled away from Los Angeles International Airport, Marcus reflected on how a simple request for water had transformed into a movement for justice. Jennifer Hayes had intended to humiliate a black child, but instead, she had sparked changes that would protect millions of children for generations to come. The incident that began with discrimination ended with transformation. The water that was denied became the catalyst for washing away barriers that had existed for decades, and the little girl who had been humiliated at 30,000 feet had grown into a young woman who used her voice to ensure that no other child would face the same treatment. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most painful experiences, and sometimes a single moment of injustice becomes the foundation for a lifetime of advocacy. In the end, Jennifer Hayes had given Zara and Marcus something more valuable than she had taken away: the knowledge that they had the power to change the world, and the responsibility to use that power for others who couldn't protect themselves. That was the real victory, and it was worth every moment of pain they had endured to achieve it. What did you think about this incredible story of discrimination meeting justice? Comment below and let me know if you've ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment while traveling. Have you ever seen someone stand up against discrimination the way Marcus did? Share your thoughts and experiences, because every story of injustice overcome gives others the courage to speak up. If this story moved you, hit that like button to show your support for standing up against discrimination. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we share stories that matter, stories that inspire change, and remind us all that we have the power to create a more just world. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family, because stories like this need to be heard. When we share experiences of discrimination and the consequences that follow, we create awareness that can prevent others from facing similar treatment. Thank you for watching, and remember that every act of kindness, every moment of standing up for what's right, and every voice raised against injustice makes our world a little bit better. Until next time, keep fighting for equality, and never forget that change is possible when good people decide to take action. Like, subscribe, share, and comment, because your engagement helps these important stories reach the people who need to hear them most. Together, we can build a world where every child is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. This powerful story teaches us several crucial lessons about discrimination, justice, and personal responsibility. First, prejudice often reveals itself through seemingly small actions that escalate into major confrontations when challenged. Jennifer's refusal to give water to a child exposed deep-seated biases that had likely influenced her behavior for years. Second, true leadership means using privilege and power to protect others, not just ourselves. Marcus could have revealed his identity immediately to stop the discrimination, but he chose to document the full extent of Jennifer's behavior to ensure lasting change for all passengers. Third, discrimination thrives in silence but crumbles under scrutiny. The passengers who recorded the incident and spoke up created accountability that transformed a private moment of prejudice into a public reckoning with consequences. Fourth, children are often the most vulnerable targets of discrimination, making it our responsibility as adults to create protective systems and teach young people to recognize and resist unfair treatment. Finally, personal pain can become the catalyst for systemic change when we choose to transform our experiences into advocacy for others. Zara's humiliation became the foundation for industry-wide reforms that will protect countless children from similar treatment. The most important lesson is that bystanders have the power to stop discrimination by refusing to remain silent when they witness injustice. Now tell us, have you ever witnessed discrimination in your travels or daily life? How did it make you feel, and what action did you take? Share your experiences in the comments, because every story of standing up against prejudice inspires others to find their courage. Hit that like button if you believe that discrimination has no place in our society, and subscribe to our channel, because we're committed to sharing stories that promote equality and justice. Don't forget to share this video with your family and friends, because awareness is the first step toward creating lasting change. Thank you for joining us on this journey from discrimination to justice. Remember that each of us has the power to make a difference when we choose to stand up for what's right. Your voice matters, your actions count, and together we can build a world where every person is treated with dignity and respect. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never forget that change is possible when good people decide to take action.